Good afternoon and welcome to LIPAD PH Innovation, Intellectual Property, and Commercialization Conversations for Startups in this year's Philippine Startup Week. I am your host, Jox Dilag, the Externals Director of LIPAD PH. We are from the League of Innovation and Intellectual Property Advocates, or LIPAD PH, a startup formed in April 2020 seeking to build a community of creators and innovators collaborating to encourage Filipino innovation in the arts, sciences, and other fields, and in the process, advocate for the protection of intellectual property rights to these creations. Through a mixed top-down and bottom-up approach, the organization is working to create an environment where innovation and intellectual property are inclusive and appreciated by many, if not all. The PAD seeks to create an atmosphere conducive to the discussion and development of intellectual property creations such as literary and artistic works, scientific inventions, and other innovative ideas. LIPAD shall be the go-to community of innovators to help them understand how to protect their intellectual property rights and what steps they can take to maximize these rights. To reach these goals, LIPAD banks on its core values: creativity, inclusivity, integrity, and professionalism. With these values, LIPAD believes that it can bring the Philippine innovation scene to new and greater heights. To further our advocacy, we have launched LIPAD Discussions, a monthly webinar discussion open to the public where our research persons tackle innovation and intellectual property concepts in general and as applied to topics that may be of interest to the public, such as the fourth industrial revolution, product research and development, and legal and policy innovations. We have already had 4 LIPAD discussions, with the most viewed session garnered around 150 live views, 3,300 cumulative views, and 9,800 in reach. To date, all of our sessions have had an average 2,000 cumulative views and 6,000 in reach. So this November, we will be having conversations with innovation, intellectual property, and finance experts, which seeks to stitch together discussions involving innovation and intellectual property frameworks and practical business considerations that startups can leverage on to ensure success. To formally start our event, let's welcome our Executive Director, Angelo Santiago.
Hi everyone, good evening. We're excited to have you here because we designed this session with you in mind. How? Well, we in LIPAD, we've noticed the existence of numerous discussions about innovation and frameworks and investment or commercialization, but they're offered separately. And being intellectual property advocates ourselves, we wondered, where are the IP conversations at? So we believe that innovation, IP, and commercialization should always be at the top of mind of our startups. So for this session, we invited experts on innovation, intellectual property, and commercialization to share with us the tips or the tools or the tricks of the trade so that you will get to be more successful in your startup insofar as innovation, intellectual property, and commercialization are concerned. So without further ado, I welcome you to our session tonight. Have fun.
So thank you, Angelo. Now let's keep the ball rolling. Our session today will feature 3 experts that will tell us more about innovation, intellectual property, and commercialization. Our first speaker is Mr. Masaki Mitsuhashi. Masaki, or Maki, recently graduated from the Asian Institute of Management with a degree Master of Science in Innovation and Business, where he was a consistent Dean's Lister and graduated with High Distinction Award, or the highest academic award in the Institute, and as valedictorian of the class. He worked on several projects related to stakeholder-centered innovations and development in the context of health, environment, climate change, disaster risk reduction, education, and leadership. He is also actively supporting and putting up startups in the Philippines, Asia, and in Europe. He has worked with organizations such as RTI International, Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation, Plan International, Seeds Asia, the United Nations Environment, and Natalie in the Light, working towards empowering communities in the Philippines, Asia, and other regions. Our second speaker is Attorney Josephine R. Santiago. Upon her assumption as the fourth Director General of the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines, or IPOPhil, Josephine Rima Santiago brought with her an expansive career spanning both public, as former IPOPhil Deputy Director General and Director of Technology Application and Promotion Institute, Science and Technology Department, and private sectors as an IP consultant, legal practitioner, researcher, and law professor, believing that advocating a culture of respect for IP rights necessitates enabling an environment that promotes the understanding of the benefits under the IP system. She actively pursues initiatives for demystifying and mainstreaming the subject. To this end, one of her flagship projects is the establishment of an effective Philippine Academy on IP, aiming to promote awareness, appreciation, and use of the IP system to a wider population of Filipinos. She takes initiatives in streamlining procedures with more efficient and shorter turnaround times, characterized by transparency, accountability, and good governance. An active member of the ASEAN, the Philippines, through the IPO Phil, is a country champion on IP enforcement, and as such, has led the crafting of the ASEAN IPR Enforcement Action Plan and currently chairs the ASEAN network of IP enforcement experts. Our third speaker is Mr. Ramon Miguel Cervantes. Ramon, or Ram's, interests have always focused on learning how businesses thrive. His early career focused on analyzing and investing in listed corporations as a portfolio manager with certifications from the CFA Institute and the Bankers Association of the Philippines. Prior to graduating with distinction from AIM's Master of Science in Innovation and Business program, he pivoted into the realm of fintech as a product manager for blockchain and investments. The presentations will be done continuously and will be followed by a fireside discussion moderated by our very own Veronica Britannico. So, let's take it away, Maki.
Thank you, Jox. Okay, so I'm Maki. So let's begin our presentation. So my topic is about seeking the right idea to adapt for a better normal. So what can you expect from me today? You can expect to learn about innovation as a problem-solving tool, the COVID-19 pandemic, opportunities for innovation, and frameworks that you can use, and becoming a better normal innovator. So what is innovation? Innovation is defined as the creation and capture of new value in new ways. It can also be about creating more effective processes, products, and ideas. It can also be about implementing new ideas, improving services, or creating dynamic products. It can be changes in the existing environment to deliver better products or services. Now, we have always heard about the 10 types of innovation, and I know it can be confusing, but you can actually summarize this in three major types. Innovation actually takes into consideration the business model, which is the center of the business, the product, which is developed by the business, and the customer through the customer experience. These just put more detail into the different types of innovation, but you can see that it really just focuses on three things: process, product, and business model. When you look at the word cloud of innovation, you see ideas, creativity, innovation, people, implementation, and results. Surprisingly, when you look at the word cloud for problem solving, you actually see the same words. So what point am I driving on in this conversation? Innovation is actually problem solving. Now, problem solving isn't a new thing for every one of us. We've actually been solving problems ever since prehistoric times. Let's take a look when people actually try to solve daily problems. People from the Stone Age lived far different lives from what we're experiencing now. Unlike the Flintstones who had it much better, they barely had anything technological, but they managed to survive. They needed something to fish, sharpen the edge of a piece of wood, and make a spear. Need something to hit the enemy? Make hammer from a piece of wood, stones, and a bunch of strings. Need something to keep them warm? They actually just burn wood. They managed to survive better because they innovated with what they have. Now let's go to a few decades back, before computer days. Things were actually done manually. Imagine if you were a business owner and you had to write things manually. This was a sales ledger to take note of the sales of filet of fish as McDonald's first introduced the product to the market. There were no spreadsheets then. So, let's imagine if your professor asked you to write certain essays of certain topics that you absolutely positively know nothing about. What's the first thing that you do right now? You actually Google it, right? Now imagine a life without a search engine. And you have to manually browse through this library to search for the answers to your questions. For you to be able to become an innovator, you start with a good problem for you to create a good solution. Your problems can be global, local, or even personal. For example, we mentioned earlier about spreadsheets. What is the thing that we commonly use? We use Excel. And what about when we want to search for more information? We just use Google. Those are solutions to problems that we have identified earlier. Anyone can be innovators, including you, including me, or even your friends or family. So, how do we become more resilient and where do we start? We start with your hugot. Now, I keep mentioning this, but innovation simply didn't start because they wanted to exist on their own. They actually started with their own hugot. So, I invite everyone to ask yourselves, what is your hugot? Or ano bang hugot mo? So, take for example, the Velcro. The Velcro actually was developed because a certain person that was walking around actually, um, uh, s- one of the seeds of the plant actually stuck on the clothes. So those are things that were really observed before then. Now, the inventor of the can opener actually forgot to bring his can opener when he was going on on a picnic, and he couldn't open a can of beer. So he developed the can opener, which was now a flip, which you can now flip when you want to drink your drink. So now the big 2020 problem, the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic is something that has affected everyone worldwide. ADB forecasted to show that economic growth will be at around 2%, although recent data showed that we're actually at a negative right now. So jobs and businesses were forced to take drastic changes, with some being forced to close down, leading to an economic decline. But did you know that Luzon, where we are now, comprises 70% of the country's GDP, and it's also where the first spike happened? One of the most impacted people here are the workers who earn on a day to day basis, such as service crews, factory worker, and laborers who can simply adjust to a work from home arrangement. In fact, some of these workers were laid off or forced to resign to cut costs. In the traditional way of thinking where A causes B is simply not the case anymore. A affects B, B affects C, and C could even affect both B and A. We need to have a more systems oriented thinking. Now, let's take a look at what changed with the COVID-19 pandemic. When pandemic happened, these were actually the applications that were downloaded based on sudden surge of downloads. So as we can see, Zoom, TikTok, Hangouts Meet, and other games and other classroom applications were actually the ones who are trending in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. You can even see that the proportion of retail sales or through e-commerce actually increased with the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, the online education platforms also increased in terms of sales. Now, let's look at the negative impact of the industry. As we all know, because of the pandemic and the health situations that we have, airline travel, tourism, casinos and gaming, leisure facilities, auto parts and equipment, oil and gas, sports and entertainment have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. Because, of course, can you travel at those times? Can you enjoy tourism while enjoying health safety protocols? A lot of people actually are now afraid to go out of their houses. However, there are also industries that thrive during the pandemic: e-commerce, courier and logistic services, online education and training, video downloading and streaming services, online conferences and meeting platforms, online gaming, insurance industry, and fintech. But according to the World Economic Forum, businesses that use cloud computing will not buckle under the pressure of the coronavirus pandemic. Further automations and artificial intelligence will enhance the resilience of supply chain. Successful business will have a combination of resilience and agility. But I don't agree completely because the new normal should be a better normal, and the 2020 solution shouldn't be just automating everything. It should be understanding your market pain points. Because innovation is the creation and capture of new value and new ways. And I always emphasize on this because the design thinking and innovation breakthrough frameworks actually has the same sort of thing. You always identify the problems through emerging and sustaining trends. You identify basic human needs. You define the problem, and then you define the business model from there. So, what is the common factor in all these frameworks? The common factor is they are centered on a need. So let's take a quick check. When you employ a design thinking framework, you're actually looking at the desirability of your innovation. But desirability isn't the only thing that you should be considering. You should also consider the business side, which is on the viability, and feasibility, which is about the technology, for you to be able to develop an experiential innovation that actually takes into consideration the market need of your market. So, how do you innovate? You think smart because thinking smart allows you to get more information. Take, for example, the figure that I am showing here. This is based on the Global Innovation Management Institute, wherein they mention that when you look at the left picture, you only just see red dots. However, if you gain more and more information that supports your claim, you actually see that it can actually form a picture of a rabbit. So, how can we do that in this situation? Well, you can look at trends trends that you can focus on. So when these are the certain frameworks that I normally use when I develop strategies. When I identify trends, I check if there's what are their impacts and uncertainties. Take for example, COVID pandemic. COVID pandemic has a high impact on the economics of everything. However, it's not uncertain anymore because we all know that COVID-19 is here. Okay? So take for example, fintech. Fintech naman has an impact to the current situation of the pandemic. However, the uncertainty of whether it's gonna move forward or move back is still quite uncertain. So it's still unknown. So let's look at it in a figure because I think I visualize better if it's in a figure. So looking at what I mentioned earlier, when you have uncertainty and impact plotted there, it's easier for you to visualize what strategy you should do. If it's a high uncertainty and a high impact, these are candidates for a defining scenario. However, if this high impact and low uncertainty, then it's a situation that you use for all scenarios. When we reframe this, those that I mentioned that are high impact, high uncertainty are things that we should be preparing for next. Whereas those with low uncertainty and high impact are things that you should already be preparing for. Like for example, the example I mentioned earlier, which is about the pandemic, is already something that we should be prepared for. However, I mentioned earlier about fintech, 'di ba? So fintech naman, because of its higher uncertainty and higher impact, it should be something that we should be preparing for next because it could be your defining scenario. So once you develop these sort of ideas, you can also validate your business idea through the business model canvas. This is something that I normally use when I make some business proposals. This ensures that I try to, as much as possible, look at the different scenarios that would affect the innovation. You can actually follow this in a certain format. You look at the customer segment because you always start with the need of the customer. Then you show the value proposition or what value can you offer to the table. How would you reach them through the channels? What relationship do you maintain with them? Revenue streams, key activities, key resources, key partnerships, and cost structure. So, what is the message that I want to tell everyone? Fail fast. Because when you fail fast, you recover fast. This is also the framework that is being used by the Lean Startup Method, wherein they invite you to fail fast because it allows you to recover fast and then you become more efficient with your resources. Now, so what are the tasks of an innovator? To constantly look for problems to solve, to gain more information about the problem, to think of creative solutions to address the problem, to make your inventions an innovation, to constantly innovate your existing innovation. Now, how do you become better normal innovators? So, some issues that you may address: eradicating disease, equal access to resources, education equality, climate change, or maybe insert old normal problems you can think of. And if I mentioned earlier, if you remember that I mentioned earlier, start with your hugot. Again, so start with your hugot and become innovators. Thank you very much, and I hope you learned a lot from my discussion.
Hi, good evening. My name is Josephine Santiago, and I will tackle the topic on intellectual property for this session. My topic is entitled Top 3 IP Matters That Startups Should Know in Creating an IP Strategy. And I thought that my approach should be a practical approach to discuss IP using the 2020 Philippine Startup Survey to drive home some points that I picked up from the report. And please expect to learn the essential considerations when handling IP. That is, what IP strategies you should have. So, as I've said, this is the report that I used as a backbone in my presentation. And this has been the report from the Price Waterhouse for 2020. Now, as the title of my talk says, there's an implication that startups should have IP strategies. Something that perhaps not all, if not most, do not have. And so whatever stage you're in, but preferably it should be at the early part of your start of your journey as a startup, that you should have an IP strategy to consider, because I know that somewhere down the road, when it's about when you're in the middle or maybe towards the end, it might be quite late for you to adopt the strategy, and it could be very costly. So whatever plans you have, please indicate or consider having an IP strategy. I will tell you what the IP strategies should cover. Now, part of the report, it says here, concrete example, IP strategy and partnerships. One, which, if any, of these activities do you plan to initiate in the next 12 months? I see that on the top of the list is enter into a strategic alliance or partnership, 95%. And then there's also the implement a cost reduction initiative, which may, however, have an impact on having an IP strategy if implementing a cost reduction initiative is high in your list. Of course, there are other activities that are being thought of here, like selling a majority interest of the business or investing in another startup. So, how does it work for the smartphone industry? You will see that there are three of examples here, three smartphones. One would be Huawei, which costs $449. The other one is Samsung Galaxy, $708. and the iPhone 809. All three of them are smartphones, but they have different costs. But they also have, they're all successful. It is, they say that smartphones have 1,000 patents, 1,000 patents, which actually are not owned exclusively by the brand, or by the ones by let's say iPhone or Samsung. There are so many patents that have been cross licensed between and among the players in the smartphone industry. So that is something that could be thought of also as a strategy in making your technology move forward, if that is part of what you have as an asset. Now, what are the top three things you need to know when creating an IP strategy? One, you have to adopt the proper IP protection that fits your startup's needs. And then, second, IP protection is a race. Be the first. Third, going abroad. File a single application for trademarks or inventions with the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines. I only chose these top three in the interest of time that had been allotted to us. So, on the first strategy, adapting the appropriate IP protection that fits your needs. Earlier, um, Masaki had mentioned about Hugot, and he said that innovation is about solving problems. Indeed, even in intellectual property, patentable inventions are all about technical solutions to a problem in any field of human activity. And why are there people who have the propensity or who have the talent to go into IP, or go into doing inventions, creating inventions? Many of them would look at the necessity. What is the need? What is the need that they have, that you have all around you? Look around and see what gaps do you need to fill that may be that may improve the lives, that may be provide convenience to the community or to an individual. So you start with something that uh, that is that is a solution to a problem. And when you have a target, uh, a target technology or target solution to a problem, then you have to um, better look at, better do a patent search if you are targeting an invention. If you have a technology that is patentable or is a solution to a problem in any field of human activity, then you target patent, or in and then, but it has to be new. It has to involve an inventive step, and also it has to be industrially applicable. In the Philippines, we are more active in filing utility models. What are utility models? These are mini patents or mini inventions that need not have the inventive step requirement. Need not have, but they may have. In As I mentioned, we are very active in utility model applications here, much more than what we do with what we have with invention applications. So the Philippines is one of the leading countries in the world which has a high utility model applications and registrations. So now, why is IP important? Because as you see in this World IP report of 2017, it says here, um, IP and other intangibles add twice as much value to products as intangible capital. Also, earlier, the speaker has mentioned about the improvement in the innovation in the modern times. We no longer engage in the activities uh, that were being practiced by our ancestors, and the IP system had been in place since the 19th century, if even formally, I mean formally, but it has been there for since the Middle Ages, especially in certain aspects of IP, like trademarks. There have been symbols already being used even the Middle Ages. Now, so gain ownership over your intellectual assets. You have to file with the government agency in the Philippines, which is the IPOFIL, to acquire your ownership rights. Of course, I mentioned here copyright, except copyright and trade secret. Um, well, you can still avail of the deposit system of the copyright, but it's not necessary because you are protected from the moment of creation. Trade secrets, something that you don't have to disclose. You must not disclose because otherwise your secret is gone. So for the other IPs like innovation, invention, trademarks, utility model, industrial design, you have to apply so that you can be granted a patent, or you can be your mark can be registered, your utility model and your industrial designs also registered. And then for MSMEs, there are measures to avail of or to take advantage of. Like there's a reduced cost for applications for MSMEs, for the youth, and even for the academe. It's 50% uh, off the big entities. So you can see here my matrix, which shows how much it costs for filing and even maintaining, for example, the patent applications or a patent that you may be granted with. No, you see how the cost is low. Of course, the other cost, which I have not shown here, would be the cost for patent agents or the IP consultants or practitioners that you may engage to work for this in your application. Now, it is also important for us to know that there's a recent law which has been passed where where even intellectual property rights can now be used as collateral in loans with banks and other financial institutions. This is the Republic Act number 11057, or the Personal Property Security Act. I've also checked going back to the Price Waterhouse report. I've seen that there are lots of mergers and acquisition deals, and I'm quite happy that it appears that for like 3 years, from 2017 to 2020, there have been investors or buyers already of some of our startups, and this is a good indication that startups are being looked into with importance already by big players. And I see that some of these are not only local but also international. I will talk about that later. So, what to put on your due diligence checklist? It says here there should be intellectual property uh, also. So, you can own IP. When conducting due diligence, you have to see whether the IP is wholly owned by the startup or maybe partly owned or co-owned. No, there's also the second one. The Are there licensing agreements? And licensing agreements are already voluntary. There is also, you have to check whether the startup is also into some litigation. Are there pending oppositions for trademarks or cancellations or infringement cases, even for inventions? And you also have to see the level or the stage of development. Okay. All right. So the second strategy or second thing to remember is that IP is a race. IP protection is a race. So it's a first to file system for invention, for industrial designs, and for trademarks. Even utility model is just a registration system. So maybe uh, that's, but it has to be new. The utility model that you are applying for must also be new. Now, let me stress the point that the our law, and recently the Supreme Court just last week had released a decision in regard to trademark applications. They, in the case of Zunica versus Natra Farm, promulgated September 8, 2020, registered mark owner prevails over a prior user. Uh, on the other hand, we have inventions saying that all you need is a working concept of the technology. Claims can be amended. These are claims is a very important part of the patent application. This is where the meets and bounds, or the what are you asking or seeking protection for. So they can be amended during dependency as long as it is covered by the description. So all you have to do is prepare a patent application that explains the working concept of your technology. Explain it well so that even if during the examination of the patent, you can negotiate or you can discuss with a patent examiner how to craft better your application, provided that it is described in another part of the application. When that happens, you don't have to, since that is the case, you really don't have to complete everything to make a prototype before you go to the patent office to apply. That might be quite late already. And that's why most of the time what happens is that the applicant is always in a hurry asking the IP office, why is it taking so long for you to proceed with or grant the application? They actually, if you are, if you intend to file a patent application, you may do it at the early part of your invention, as I've explained here. So it is important for you to apply, to be the first to apply, because you will be granted the patent or the trademark if it qualifies under the requirements of the IP. So while time is of the essence, efficiency is the key. Do it right the first time. For certain types of IP, a wrong application or poorly drafted one could be costly. It may also lead to refusal or denial of your application. So if you do it yourself, there's no problem, especially that in the in the in trademarks and even in the other applications before the IPOFIL now, it's online. It's an online application. Anyone can apply. We have instituted back during in my time for the last couple of years, we have already put in place the online system for patents, for trademarks. It's from end to end. So from application and even during the communications between the examiner and the applicant. So it's easy to file now. But we should not discount the fact that that professional help is necessary in order that we do not so that we save time and also we do not waste our resources. Now, the third um, thing that you should remember is that if you want to go abroad, and that is shown in the survey that I was mentioning earlier, you can file a single application for trademarks and inventions with the IPOFIL. So here, I saw that the survey says that new territories to tap in the next 5 years. So other areas in the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. Um, there it's also a case that the either the startups or maybe their investors would like to go in several places, and I'm showing you here a table where this is a table of the ASEAN countries where uh, two important treaties may be availed of to simplify your application when you want to go abroad. Except for Myanmar, all 9 countries in the ASEAN are already members of the Patent Cooperation Treaty and the Madrid Protocol. What are these? Um, these are two filing systems to facilitate patent and trademark applications. So the Patent Cooperation Treaty is a filing system. It's not a granting system because each country is still going to examine the patent application when it reaches their country at the end of an international phase. In the case of trademarks Madrid Protocol, there are now 107 countries, and as I've shown you, the members of the ASEAN countries are members of these two. So um, for Madrid, it's both a filing and a registration system. Except for Myanmar, you need to file directly with Myanmar as if you're filing with the Philippines. The beauty of the uh, applying under the two treaties is that you only need to file a single application with the Philippine with the IPOFIL, and you can be you can secure protection in all countries that you might want to choose later. Okay. So this is just this is again the slide that I've shown you at the beginning. So in short, um, what are the top 3 things that you need to know? One is adopt the proper IP protection that fits your startup. I would like to add here that, for example, you want to you're into food industry or food business, and you want to just keep uh, the recipe, for example, that you are using for your food distribution, then you can just keep it. There's no need for you to move. Just ensure that your trade secret is secured. Okay, and that is adapting the proper IP protection for your trade secret. Now, IP protection is a race. Be the first to apply. And number three, you can now facilitate your international applications through the use of the two treaties that the Philippines is a member of. And vice versa, if you are abroad, if you are based, for example, in another ASEAN country, or even in the US, or maybe in Japan, you can file in the Philippines using the same uh, treaties that I have already mentioned. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you guys. You've heard about innovation and you've heard about IP, and now we're going to talk about something that everyone's very interested in, the money. Because when you're going to start out your business, of course, this is also going to be a factor. How can you reach that commercialization level? And whether this is something that you've thought of for years and years, or maybe you were watching Netflix and saw the startup and thought, hey, this is the perfect solution in this kind of pandemic, you want to start this business. How are you going to get that started? So we'll talk a little bit about how you can raise funding from, of course, your inner circle, the founding team, and work outwards to the professional level. Of course, bootstrapping is the first thing that you can think of. Here's my founding team. Let's get this all together. What are the resources that we have in place? Can we build that POC, the proof of concept? Maybe if your team's really good at utilizing these resources, you can build your MVP or your minimum viable product, which is great. But not every idea that you think of is probably going to be funded by this. Maybe it takes a little bit more than that. So you might need to get capital from your other circle, your friends, your family, and maybe the fools that you can tag along. Now, it's great because they believe in your idea, they probably like you as a person, and they want to trust their money with you. But you'll find out, as with any of these funding methods, there are a bit of pros, a bit of cons. Of course, the biggest con is that you're dealing with money. And if you're not very clear from the get go about how you're going to pay them back, how much say they have in the company, it's going to lead to a lot of problems. And there are a lot of relationships that are great, but it becomes a bit toxic when money is injected into it. So you need to make sure that you're clear on that side. But the big pro is that because these are your friends and your family, they're people that you should trust. And they're a great sounding board for the different ideas that you might have about your startup. Is this something great? Is this something that you would use? Do you think other people in your circles would use it? And when you get all that feedback, you can integrate it in building up your project. One of the early tips that you should have is you should keep as much of the pie as possible. And I know that sounds like it's very obvious. I want to keep as much of the pie as possible, but then how am I going to build this out if I don't give something up? So the question of how can I maintain control and stay debt free if possible early on? Well, there are some ways, but you're going to need to put in a lot of sweat equity to do this. You need to look for different grants, different institutions, maybe competitions and hackathons for low cost capital. Imagine what's happened since pandemic started. There have been so many different institutions who are focused on giving grants for people who have innovative ideas that attack or address the problems that we've seen given the problems today. But this is by no means easy. There are a lot of people who are going to compete with you for this. So make sure that you can apply for the things that are relevant to your firm. Is your product, is your service something that is a bullseye? This is perfect for this kind of problem, for this kind of solution that we can provide, will be great at this. You can try to get your reps as much as possible, but make sure that you're not casting too wide of a net because you need to also protect the intellectual property as mentioned earlier. The next thing is that when you've built out that prototype, once you've had this project that we have traction, there are users, there's revenue, it can be in any form, you need to find out maybe there are angel investors who want to participate here. Now that you have users, now that you have some money coming in, I'm interested, I want to buy in. But maybe that's just 1% of the population. So, how do you improve your odds of finding these people? You need to build up your network. If you have 100 friends right now, maybe you need to double, triple, tenfold. Find ways to increase that and don't be too discouraged when some investors or some partners show up that say, I think it's a pass for now. Because the thing is, it's a pass for now, but you never know. They might have people in their networks that they can connect you to. Maybe you can work with them and find out if there are co-branding opportunities, things that you can develop together. And maybe even down the line, they will invest with you because you've already built up more traction at a future point. So don't close things off just because there's a toll booth there that's kind of preventing you from moving forward. In the future, maybe you can pay that toll and get on the highway. Now, it's very important that when you reach this step, that you make sure that you look at all of those little details because a lot of people they're excited about commercialization. They're excited about making money from their business. But the thing is that when you're networking and you want to lock in a deal, maybe you don't crunch the numbers enough and you accept a deal that isn't great for your company long term. So understand the devil in the details. Do you really want to have these different forms of funding? Are you going to raise debt or equity? Are you willing to give up some of control? Do you want them to be common shareholders? Do they want to be preferred shareholders? Do you want to give up some convertible debt? Is that something you want to offer? So look at all these different creative funding methods and it depends on your business. Sometimes for some manufacturing firms, you can offer an investor something like purchase order financing. You can research all these different things that might be relevant for your firm so that you don't have to give up too much control, especially in these early stages. And lastly, of course, you want to get chosen. You want to get chosen among all of these different people. You want to raise your Series A, in the future B, C, D, and the rest of the alphabet that follows. But the important thing is that you want to be the one that gets the funding because you want to get commercialized. And whether you're going for a social enterprise or you're going for something that's a bit more profit oriented, the story is the same. You want to find out where's the best place for you to get that partner so that they're invested in you. So if you want to lock in that deal, what is an important tip to keep in mind? It's to know yourself. Know what you do better than everyone else. Know who do you appeal to, not just to the consumers that you're trying to sell your product or service to, but also the investors out there. You see, you want to make sure that you're selling yourself to someone who already has an open mind to you. Are you going to be a fintech that makes great synergies with a bank? Are you going to be a logistics platform that has great synergies with an e-commerce company? Find out which ones are actually relevant to you, not just because you can make them money, but because there are synergies that exist that make them think you guys are perfect for us to be a partner. And it makes perfect sense for you guys to synergize and maybe invest in us down the line. By doing this, by understanding who you are and where you are in the total landscape, you can play the man and not the game, as Harvey Specter once said. You can understand how people are going to position your product, your service, your company in their minds, and that'll make you very attractive for the right investor. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that you learned. Feel free to network with me as well, and we'll be happy to hear any of your questions here in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ram, and good evening to all of our participants. So at this point, we will be calling on Maki Mitsuhashi, Attorney Josephine Santiago, and Ram Cervantes to elaborate on some of the points that they shared earlier. So, once again, good evening, everyone. My name is Veronica, and I will be your moderator for our open forum this evening. So, before we begin, to our speakers, let's take this chance to invite our Philippine Startup Week participants to please leave their questions on the chat box below. So, let's make this interactive. And I know our speakers will be excited to answer some of your burning questions. So, maybe to start off for our panelists, you know, in the virtual setting now, especially in the new normal, there's a lot of misinformation that abound, right? So, what is one top concept in your field that is often overlooked or misunderstood by non practitioners or by the general public? Maybe it's something that is usually a myth, or maybe sometimes people misunderstand it or view it differently. So, are there any ideas that come to your
Yeah.
mind with regards to that?
Maybe I
Maki,
can
would you like
start.
to start? Please.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one, like for example, I'm from an innovation background. But I guess one of the misconceptions that people think about the whole thing is that innovation is simply about creating more ideas. But actually when you think about it, that's only one part of the equation. When you think of innovation, it's not supposed to be just about idea generation. It's also supposed to be about idea evaluation. Because when you're putting idea evaluation into a context, then it allows you to identify which idea should be prioritized. Because if you're able to prioritize ideas, you also become more resource efficient. Given, of course, that you're in a startup environment, you have very limited resources. So you have to be smart about your resources as well.
Having to be smart about resources. That's also something that Ram touched on earlier, right? Being smart with your strategy
Yeah.
as well. So maybe Ram, I'm sure marami kang hugot dito. Take it away.
Yeah, sure. I think that one of the major things that people don't realize when they're trying to approach companies, especially corporate venture capital funds, is that it's all or nothing. Either they're investing with us or they're not. And when it's no, that means that we stop the relationship with them, which is usually not the case. Obviously, there's difference because we're a bank, so that we can offer maybe other services there in Union Bank. But there are certain times when you develop a relationship, you can find synergies, and over time you build a relationship such that it makes sense for a corporation. It makes sense for even a private equity fund to invest in you because there are so many interconnected details that makes it perfect for us to integrate with them. Whether it's because they want to get your services and offer that to the broader public, their customers, or maybe they want to white label some of your solutions as well. There are a lot of different ways for you to partner with the corporations that exist. They're not always trying to be the big bad wolf that's stomping everyone down. If you find the right people in the right industries, they might be the ones that enable you and could fast track you. So definitely try to find the right people with the right institutions because they might be the ones who accelerate you.
That's a great point, right? People with the right institutions. And coupled with that also is the need to have the right protections for your great ideas as a startup. So, Attorney Josephine Santiago, maybe you can share with us what are some of the misconceptions naman po regarding IP that our startup founders and participants would need to know?
Um, I see that the misconception that they often have would be that IP is only for big corporations and only for foreign applicants, and it's not so important for local or Filipino inventors. I think that is something that has been that is a sort of an approach or a mindset that does not encourage, that is not encouraging for Filipinos. The truth of the fact is that truth of the matter is that we have so many talented Filipinos who are great with their projects or research on things that are useful for the country, and the what is the problem that we have prevailing is that there's a small budget that we have for research and development, and this and our talents are not really being uh, maximized, or there if we have talents at all, and as I said we have, they sometimes get uh, disgruntled, they leave the country where there is better opportunity for the creation or showing of their talents. So um, that's one big problem that we have, and so much so that they, when they say that, you see in the Philippines, what you protect mainly are only foreign corporations, and that's disheartening. That's not actually true, because we have the government had already for the past few years have seen the need for protecting innovation and intellectual property. That's why we it might be quite we're quite late in the scheme of things in the universe, but the thing is we are already moving towards that. So
And growing on from what you mentioned, Attorney Santiago, with the pandemic now, it's as good a time as any to disrupt and to use research and development to improve the ways that we have used, we have gone forward in terms of business and in terms of legislation. So mukhang based on what you guys have shared in terms of the misconceptions and misunderstandings, parang gaya ng sinabi ni Maki kanina, parang medyo malalim-lalim ang hugot dito. And that's very important because improvement and progress, whether it's a pandemic or not, it can only happen, like what Maki said earlier, if you can make it a habit to understand your pain points. And it's often from the pain points where we can find the solutions to our problems. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
growing from that, then perhaps we can discuss, kayo po ba, for our distinguished panelists this evening, what are some of the pain points that you have experienced? What are some key gaps that need to be addressed in your field? So these could be technical, they could be legal, behavioral, structural. Yeah, and what are some that you feel need to be prioritized to improve your respective fields of innovation, of intellectual property, and of commercialization?
uh, in the
Yes,
field of
ma'am. Sure.
IP, yeah, in the field
Mhm.
of IP, we're still in the infancy stage, if I may describe it, in relation to the number or maybe the population in which the country would be aware of IP. We have a very small fraction of the population who understand much more, appreciate IP. They always think that IP can be relegated to the back seat.
Uh-huh.
We need to go ahead, have money, pursue our business, but they don't know that IP is a very good competitive advantage. It provides a very good competitive advantage to businesses, because in fact that should be the it should be part of the whole strategy of having a business, having an IP strategy by itself. It should fit into the whole strategy. It should not be put at the back. Otherwise, your whole business might crumble, because simply because you did not avail or you did not use the appropriate type of IP that needs to be done timely in a timely manner.
Mhm. Mhm. Definitely in a timely manner. And when we think of the urgency of this, minsan po kasi they tend to relegate it, diba, na parang, let's just maybe save for that kapag may budget na. So, ang nangyayari tuloy, diba, ma'am, what happens is the very fact that they delayed it means na they compromise their business or their startup or their idea in the long run. Is this
Correct.
something that you see happen often?
Yes. If I may just cite an example, we this is a true story about inventor, one Filipino inventor who had discovered the cashew nut as cashew nut as
Mhm.
also a cure for certain types of cancer. I think for the skin.
Kasui, really?
Yeah, that was like 2 decades ago when it was brought to our attention, and the inventor was trying to ask for our help, but the thing is, the inventor had already disclosed the technology or the invention to the whole world, and now he's trying to rectify by filing an application. You cannot do that anymore because it has been disclosed. It's no longer new. So that's why most of the, if not except for trademarks, patent, utility models, industrial designs, your invention or your IP must be new. That's why you cannot relegate it. As I will repeat, you cannot relegate it and save it for tomorrow. You need to do it now because tomorrow is no longer new, and you will cry over, or you will regret over the fact that you did not prioritize intellectual property, which gives you a competitive advantage over the others who don't. So,
Mhm.
for you who put who put IP as part of their strategy, and for others who don't, then that by itself puts you on top of the list of businesses.
Exactly. It's so sayang, ma'am. It was a lost opportunity. And I'm sure that won't be the last if
There's
people
so
keep
so many
procrastinating.
sub stories, Veronica. So many sub stories. It could be another
And be,
webinar for us.
I imagine. And of course, with the rate of innovations right now, it's just in our best interest to keep them protected kasi they also become a source of national pride, di po ba?
Yes.
So for the, how about you, Maki? In terms of innovations, ano yung mga key gaps na nakita mo, especially that are related to Philippine startups?
I guess yung ano, yung with regards to Philippine startups, I guess one of the many things that people don't really see is that they're actually innovating. Kasi when people think about innovation, they only think that it's the tech people who are developing innovation. But when you think about it kasi, even, di ba I mentioned earlier that there are three major types of innovation. You can either innovate on the business model, you can innovate on the product or service, or you can innovate on the customer experience. But you're actually, as long as you're developing technology, or at least as long as you're answering a problem, then that means that you're trying to innovate because you're maximizing the limited resources that you have for you to be able to create value, but at the same time capture value because you're addressing the problem. I think that's one of the main problems that it should be understood by all. Na parang you're innovating, which I think also applies also po ma'am, di ba, with intellectual property, that everyone should be able to understand that even the smallest thing should be protected because, as mentioned by ma'am earlier, intellectual property is also an asset that you should take care of.
Mhm. Mhm. So drawing from that, we have the idea that everyone is a creator, as mentioned by
Yeah.
Ma'am Josephine. Therefore, there's this incentive to protect your idea. Then, as Maki said, right, everyone is an innovator. So
Yes.
whether it's not limited to the IT folks, right,
Yeah.
or for example, innovation grads, but
Yeah.
also perhaps bridging it, then Ram might also agree that everyone is also an investor because you invest time, you invest resources, and you invest a part of your life with every venture that you have, especially with a startup where you want it to solve problems not just for your personal gain, but also for a greater gain. So ikaw naman, Ram, ano yung mga nakikita mong key gaps for startups who that kind of impede them from making the most of commercialization opportunities?
I think the biggest problem, maybe in that sense, in building off Mackie, it's also people related and it's more about behavior. Because sometimes, maybe moving back to the tech side of it, you can come up with something that's very inventive, but it's hard for you to reach scale because maybe people don't trust it yet. And maybe, for example, someone who's working in fintech, a lot of the innovations they're trying to do, obviously internally we feel it's great, but sometimes people don't trust it just yet. And one of the silver linings with what's happened so far is that people have become more accustomed to doing all of these things digitally, doing transactions digitally, and that's been great. But hopefully, it won't take something like this for other inventive ideas to really come out and profit and prosper. Because if we're going to wait for these kinds of epidemics to happen just for someone to be able to say, hey, this great idea, you guys can use it, and a lot of people are like, I don't really want to use it yet because there's no immediate urgency for it, then I think that's problematic. And because of that mindset, it's also hard to get people capital. You can't really develop a lot of the ideas that you want to do if there aren't a lot of resources, or if those resources are so scarce that how can you build it up? And that's even something that we see on the corporate side as someone who's working in fintech with blockchain technology, something very new. It's so hard for you to find someone who's capable of doing that in this country. So we really need to have other resources that can help develop the people capital or the human capital skills in the country for us to be able to prosper. Things like the accelerator program of Union Bank, things that are able to upskill people, hopefully at not too high of a cost, so that we can help innovate for all.
Hmm, I like that. Innovate for all. Because when people innovate and when they protect their rights to do that, right, and when they work with the right people, with the right institutions, then really innovations benefit all. And that's really what startups, the spirit of a startup is about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we can also, uh, we're happy to answer a question that we have here from our audience. So, since now we're aware of all the different gaps that you guys can see from different aspects of your industry, so let's, and based on what Ram mentioned earlier about the growth mindset, hindi naman kasi pwede na we have to wait for something catastrophic to happen again for us to take advantage of technologies or tools that we can already harness, no? So if we want, earlier Maki mentioned systems thinking, where
Yeah.
different stakeholders are interconnected. So I suppose based on our question also here, let's put that into action. So for our panelists, how can you relate a specific application, relate or suggest a specific application or concept in your field to fill in the gaps of the fields of your fellow panelists? So maybe to simplify it, no, like for example, how can IP serve or improve innovations, and how can it improve commercialization? How can commercialization protect, not only protect IP rights, but at the same time encourage innovation? And the same for innovation. How can your field, Maki, benefit the field of the other two? So maybe you want to start, Maki?
Okay. Sige, I think it was really insightful, no? I really like the discussion of Ram and Attorney Josephine. And I think I can actually relate it to my idea earlier na parang it's sort of answering the concept about yung misconception of innovation, that you're actually just generating ideas. Because actually, when you think about it, when you think about yung pagiging investable niya through Ram's discussion, and also about the intellectual property component of whether it's proprietary or whether if it's patentable or if it's totally new idea, then that can actually be one consideration when you evaluate ideas. Kasi 'di ba, if you're able to evaluate your ideas based on the tech, which is yung sa mga patents, etc., yung pagiging investable niya, which is yung long term, parang are you gonna earn from it or not, then it allows you to be able to evaluate your ideas better. So parang if you're able to select which ideas would survive in the long term, then it also allows you at that point to fail early so you can recover faster. So nangyari diyan, because of that, you're also able to save or at least be more efficient with your resources. So I think that's important. And I think that's what I got from Ram and Attorney Josephine's discussion earlier.
They don't have to be separate, right?
Yeah. Pwede
But
siyang
like,
together.
oo, parang yung rabbit na figure mo kanina, 'di ba?
Yes.
Concerns regarding IP and regarding commercialization, they can be part of the dots, and together
Yeah.
they can all form the big picture, right? So
Yes.
how about Ram or Attorney Santiago? Maybe who wants to go first? Go next, rather. Ma'am,
Yeah,
please.
man.
Okay, thank you. Um, Innovation. There's a saying, or there's a, it's a. I think it's true that not in 1,000 innovations you only have like two successful ones. It's not all
Reality.
successful in all the ventures that we go into. There would be failures, as according to Misaki, and that is a reality. So it is important that when we do and think of ideas or think of ways to solve certain problems, it has to be targeted. I think there must be a target. You need to have a target. You need to be focused on something. You do not do shotgun innovation and discard most of them. When you are able to identify which is a solution to maybe a common problem, and later on you will know that that solution could be adopted by the market or by the public, then you address also the commercialization aspect of the activity that you want to go into. So that means that you need to be more focused. Do not do in creation just for the sake of. Do it
Mhm.
because there you are trying to solve something that later on can be accepted by the market. Then that is addressing from the beginning any innovation, and also RAM's commercialization, or efficient use of the money that can be used to invest in the technology that you are trying to develop. So um, it's no longer a case of, maybe in some universities or some inventors, just for the sake of submitting research projects to solve,
Correct.
just to maybe for purposes of completing some certain requirements in a curriculum or in a course. It would be best to really look for, to really think about it, and see that intellectual property is not there just for us to have a diploma or a certificate hanging on the wall.
Mhm.
IP system is here because we need to have more. There should be more new products in the market at the end of your activity. It's no longer just having these innovations or inventions for you to keep in the drawer later on. It has to be used, has to be utilized by the public for the benefit of the community or even of the country. Thank you.
Wonderfully said. So to benefit more, you need to understand why you're doing it, and you have to see it as a system, ni po ba? Not just as a checklist. And I'm
Yes.
sure, or a part of a checklist. So I'm sure Ram will also have a lot of things to add about that.
I'm really happy that they went ahead, Mackie and Attorney Josephine, of course, because they've already mentioned a lot of these things about commercialization in their presentations. If you notice, Mackie always focused on the business value of it. And then Attorney Josephine also mentioned how much more valuable a company is because of the IP that exists. Because obviously, if you're going to be a firm that isn't innovative, or you're a firm that came up with something but doesn't have it protected, it makes it hard for you to commercialize, and it makes it hard for you to even want to invest in it because what's stopping me, someone who just heard your idea, from doing the exact same thing? And that's why it's important that, yes, you bring in a lot of value as the founder, you bring in a lot of value in terms of your own skills, but you need to integrate things like innovation, things like IP that help protect your business to make it seem like this is not something that we can just easily cop from you. It's not just something that's taken from you, because this is something that is held by the firm, and that makes you guys more attractive for a lot more investors.
Mhm. Thank you for that, Ram. And as our panelists mentioned here today, so ladies and gentlemen, I think more than anything, what we're getting from our discussion this evening and from the presentations earlier as well is that we have innovation, we have intellectual property, we have commercialization. All three of these form a trifecta. So they are three pillars of startup protection, right? They're not best seen individually or best seen in silos or compartmentalized, but rather they're each part of their systems in themselves, correct? But they also work together in the greater system of the startup system in the Philippines and also worldwide. So perhaps to wrap up our discussion, no? Huling hirit na po. So for Maki, for Attorney Santiago, and for Ram, what are your key takeaways for the audience? If there's one thing that you absolutely want them to remember and to apply in their lives, in their startups, what would it be?
So, ako ba muna ulit?
Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
Sige. Okay, so I think based lang naman on my discussion, I would like to emphasize that everyone can be innovators. But you always have to prioritize your resources better. But at the same time, always start with your hugot because that's how you develop the problems that you want to solve through innovation. So, ayun, start with your hugot. Yun lang talaga.
Um, Having an IP strategy as part of your total business strategy will give you the needed competitive advantage. Use the appropriate IP and apply protection in a timely manner at the earliest opportunity.
I believe that if you want to be successful, you need to remember the acronym CIA. And this is not the organization. It's that you need to be competent. You need to understand the skills that you have in place. You need to be insightful to know what exists in the market out there so that you can better position yourself. And you need to be adaptable because you don't know what's going to happen in the world. So you need to combine the two things I discussed earlier so that you can position yourself the best way possible, no matter what happens out there.
No matter what happens, pandemic or no pandemic. So, for
Exactly.
our listeners and viewers, so we hope that you learned something, but we hope even more that you apply what you learned today. And thank you very much. Please, let's all put our hands together for our dear speakers. Over to you, Jocks.
So thank you, Veronica, for that wonderful fireside chat. It's really an amazing time to have these three speakers to have share their experiences and insights with with the audience today. I know that we have other questions coming from the audience, but unfortunately, this is all the time that we have today. So we hope you enjoyed and learned a lot from this webinar. And before we end, we would like to invite everyone to visit our Facebook page and like it at facebook.com/phlipad for fresh contents on innovation and intellectual property. Thank you very much and have a great day.